There's more stuff in here. Okay, guys, we're back. We had some technical difficulties.
Yeah, part two. A lot of stuff going too fast here. So we just finished talking about the stomach acid and enzymes. Let's move on.
All right, so my favorite topic, the microbiome. So this is also known as the gut flora. You might also call them those little organisms that live in your digestive tract and all over your body. So we're going to tell you a little bit about what they do and why they're so important for your digestion as well.
Hopefully you can hear us.
Yes, hopefully you can hear us. No one to confirm, but that's okay. So we got a lot of those bad boys in our body. You have literally trillions of microorganisms. And these are not just bacteria, but also beneficial yeasts and fungi as well. So we have basically more of their cells than we have our own cells, which is kind of crazy. You have over 500 species of different ones here. In the stomach, you have about 10,000 of them, about 100,000 in the small intestine, but the majority of them live in the large intestine, anywhere from 50 to about 100 trillion that live there.
That's not appetizing, but it is necessary, I guess.
Yes. So they have various functions. So the microbiome essentially, it's believed to function like an organ. So the way that these organisms communicate with each other, the way that they function, the different pathways that they use, behave in a very similar way to an organ. So they communicate with each other as well as other cells of the body. They also program the immune system at birth. Okay, so whichever way you're born, whether you were delivered vaginally or through a C-section, that starts to determine what populations you have of these microorganisms. So those who are delivered vaginally actually receive some of the mother's bacteria through the birth canal. And so those people have been shown to kind of have a better setup for their immune system when they're born. Breastfeeding does this too.
Right. But a doctor can kind of help a C-section baby along if they are able to transfer some of that vaginal fluids and inoculate basically the baby.
So it sounds kind of weird, but they can like wipe it on the baby. They'll like swab their mouth with it, things like that. Yeah. And that will help introduce some of those bacteria. Right. Yeah. They produce some nutrients for us. So vitamin K and B12 in particular are produced exclusively by bacteria. So even when you eat food with B12 in it, the only reason it has any B12 is from the bacteria, not from the the food itself. And on a same note, you can really only absorb and use these nutrients if you have the gut bacteria to do so. Another thing they do is they help convert fiber. So fiber is converted into fatty acids, namely short chain fatty acids. And these are they're kind of used as like a buffer for the colon cells. So they help keep the cells healthy. It also keeps them from mutating into cancer cells. So it's really important. The marketing term you hear often for this is postbiotics. So we've already talked about pre and probiotics. So these are the postbiotics. So these are the products, the byproducts of metabolism of the bacteria. They also help make neurotransmitters like serotonin, which is your happy hormone. So a lot of times you will see, things like anxiety and depression. Those are in part caused by a lack of serotonin and some of these other neurotransmitters. So there's been a lot of research examining that relationship and using probiotics to try to help people naturally increase their production of serotonin. So it's really, really interesting, the research that's going on. And then the other thing they do is immunomodulation, which is basically regulating the immune system. So the microbiome ensures that immune tissue is being produced. We make the majority, about 80% of our body's immune system cells and tissues are all made in the intestines, okay? So it's really, really important that you have those bacteria so that those immune cells can produce as well. Bacteria or your organisms also help neutralize substances that can harm our immune system. So every day we are exposed to various things from outside. This can include drugs and medications. This can include pollutants from the environment, heavy metals, just things that we're breathing every day in the air. I mean, we don't live in a bubble, so we have to be exposed to these things. So they really help to kind of neutralize those into compounds that are not harmful for us.
Can you go back to the serotonin? I don't know if this would be a good time to kind of link together the depression aspect and the drugs that they're given for that, and how it can possibly be a vicious cycle.
So what she's referring to is a class of drugs that are used to treat anxiety and depression called SSRIs, which stands for selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. That's a mouthful. But what those drugs do is they don't actually make your body make more serotonin. What they do is they help you just keep recycling the serotonin that you have. Okay. So they aren't actually helping with that. And they can actually, because of the pathways that are involved in that recycling process, that recycling tells the gut, oh, I don't need any more serotonin right now. So it doesn't really help you with that production, that endogenous production, which means from inside the body. So it can actually block that process even further. So while I'm not sitting here telling you not to take SSRIs, if you're on one, don't go throw it in the trash right now, but something to consider, especially if you wanted to try to take a more natural approach. There are even certain foods that you can eat that will specifically help you make more serotonin yourself. So there are other ways, but just so you kind of understand the mechanism. And this is one more demonstration of that gut-brain axis. Okay. So the serotonin is actually made in the gut, and then it's sent up to the brain through that axis.
Okay. Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, so what are the consequences of disruption of the microbiome? You're going to hear the term dysbiosis several times through the rest of this discussion. So dysbiosis is just an imbalance of the gut flora. Most of the time, this means that you have more pathogens or kind of bad guys than good ones, but you can have too many good ones as well. It just doesn't happen as often. So one big consequence of this, of course, is infections, because when pathogens, which are things that cause us illness, are allowed to kind of overgrow the good guys, their ability to regulate them fails and they overtake them. So one example of this is what's called SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And the bacteria actually relocate from the colon, where they belong, up to the small intestine, where they do not belong. So even though you already have some bacteria in your small intestine, it's very specific types and very specific species that are supposed to be there. Same with the colon. So they're not supposed to kind of switch back and forth. All right. This is felt to be caused by that leaky gut we were talking about earlier, because literally the bacteria will leak out of the colon or the large intestine and sort of make their way up to the small intestine. SIBO can cause various symptoms like bloating, gas, reflux, indigestion, which I realize are kind of vague symptoms. Those could be indicative of a lot of things, but it's just, one thing to sort of be aware of. Bacteria also can move from the stomach to the small intestine, causing similar issues. So people who have had stomach ulcers in the past, or history of that H. pylori that we talked about earlier, those people are at risk, as well as people who generally don't have enough stomach acid. Then we have antibiotic-related infections, which you see in healthcare a bit more. Antibiotic overuse is responsible for about 2 million infections a year. And so people will actually have to be hospitalized for this. And the ironic thing is that often it's treated with other antibiotics, but never mind. I won't get on that soapbox today. There is one condition called C. diff colitis, which is actually a relatively common antibiotic-related infection, and it can be deadly. It tends to keep coming back after the first infection, which is a little unique. It's very persistent, and it is resistant to some antibiotics. So a lot of times it's treated with something called a fecal transplant, which is exactly what it sounds like. They take fecal matter out of a person with a healthy microbiome, and they transplant it into the colon of the person with the infection.
I've seen blood donations, but I have never seen where do you go for the donations.
I'll let you guys build your own visuals there. But it's typically done through an enema. Sometimes they'll put them in capsules and put them down through an endoscopic tube, but it's usually done through enema. It's lovely, but it has a very high success rate, and it's very effective in preventing this from coming back. So that's good.
So you're planting seeds, basically.
Exactly. You're seeding the colon. That's exactly what it is. You are also more likely, when you have had, when you've been taking a lot of antibiotics, or you have dysbiosis, you're much more prone to foodborne illnesses and food poisoning. Okay. Because that, again, is part of the role of these beneficial bacteria is to help kind of keep those pathogens under control. So if there's not enough of them to be able to do their job, you're more likely to get sick from food. And that's no fun for anyone who's ever had that. I do not recommend salmonella. Okay. So generally speaking, you're going to be more prone to infection because of that suppression of the immune cells and tissue. You're also going to see some increased inflammation in the digestive system and possibly elsewhere, depending on, whether you've got some leaky gut. So a weak immune system can present as underactive, which if you're constantly sick, you're constantly getting infections, you catch whatever's going around at the time, that's indicative of an underactive system. Whereas an overactive system is more things like food allergies or just general allergies, and autoimmune diseases. So that means that the immune system is working overtime, attacking things that it shouldn't be attacking. And then finally, you can accumulate some of these environmental toxins that we were talking about because, again, you don't have enough bacteria to neutralize them. So these are just some kind of common issues that people have with some potential causes and symptoms. So I won't go through every single one of these things, and this is certainly not intended to diagnose anything at all. This is just to get you kind of thinking so that if you are having some issues that you want to get addressed, this gives you a little background information so that you know what to discuss with the doctor, maybe things that you can ask about, how about this test, or whatever. So this is just to kind of help you figure out what might be possibly going on, give you a little inside detective kind of intel, I guess. So you can see irritable bowel syndrome. The main thing I want to say about it is that irritable bowel syndrome is typically given as a diagnosis, and that's kind of it. All right. So usually when the doctor tells you have irritable bowel or IBS, they might tell you to eat more fiber in your diet. They might give you a pill, something like that. But irritable bowel syndrome is not intended as a diagnosis. It is actually a symptom of some other thing. It is almost always caused by another issue, whether it could be your diet, it could be the quality of your diet, it could be the fiber, lack of fiber. Stress is very strongly linked to irritable bowel syndrome. So people with anxiety and high stress levels tend to have more disruptions of their GI tract. And then people with food sensitivities, you may not even be aware of those sensitivities, but they can cause those things. And then, of course, dysbiosis. So of all of these, I really want to emphasize that irritable bowel syndrome should not be the end of it. That should be the beginning of it. Okay, and that's when you really want to start kind of deep diving and figuring out what's going on.
Seems like it's kind of a bucket where they label people
that
don't know what it really is going on.
It's a catch-all diagnosis. It's a diagnosis of exclusion. In other words, they've kind of looked at other things and can't figure it out. So it's IBS. So to me, I'm not satisfied with that. I don't suggest you be satisfied with that. Definitely push for further testing and look at some of these other things that we'll be discussing in the next slides.
You really have to be your own advocate.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Nobody is a better advocate for you than you.
I thought I did too many.
Okay, so autoimmune diseases. So the majority of autoimmune diseases are known to start in the gut. There's a long list of these guys too, but just to give examples, things like celiac disease, type 1 diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, psoriasis, okay, lupus, things like that. So these are all autoimmune diseases. They're all known to start in the gut. One that directly affects the digestive system is inflammatory bowel disease. So this is a category, and there's two diseases within this, which is Crohn's or ulcerative colitis. So these are caused by that overstimulation of the immune system, causing inflammation in the colon. So what happens is that the immune system, the immune cells in the colon start attacking other body cells. So they go from being a team and working together. Normally the cells tell the immune system what it needs and they provide it. But here they start attacking them instead. The immune system will also attack certain foods as invaders. Okay, so you've got a whole breakdown of the system here. But it causes poor absorption of nutrients, which can lead to deficiencies, and then worsening inflammation. So again, you kind of end up in this vicious cycle of inflammation and immune system attack and food reactions. It does also have ties to dysbiosis. Excuse me. And it's very important to identify your trigger foods so that you can manage your symptoms as best as possible. All right, so celiac disease. So celiac disease is a really kind of unique autoimmune disease because it also requires, in addition to all these other circumstances of the hyperactive immune system attacking the body, you also have to have a gene for this. So in order to have celiac disease, you must have at least one copy of the genes that are listed here. Now, if you have intolerances to wheat or gluten, so you know when you eat wheat or gluten, you react in a certain way, but you know for a fact you don't have the gene, this is called non-celiac gluten sensitivity. So it's you react similarly, but you don't see the same. It's not autoimmune and it's not genetic related. So it's a little bit different. So what happens is that those villi, again, those lovely little finger-like projections you have in your intestines, when you expose them to gluten repeatedly, they begin to atrophy or flatten. So what happens is that it literally cannot grab onto the nutrients, and so the nutrients aren't absorbed, and then you will end up with inflammation as well, because again, it just takes the cells of the intestinal wall just keep taking a hit. There's various symptoms of this, things like diarrhea, bloating, and anemia, B12 and other deficiencies, because again, if your villi are damaged, you're not absorbing certain nutrients. So typically people that have undiagnosed celiac, you tend to see a lot of iron deficiency and a lot of B12 deficiency, maybe vitamin D and some other things as well. Some people might have unexplained skin rashes or bumps, joint pain and anxiety. And it's also important to note that even if you don't have celiac and you just have the sensitivity, you may also still have these same symptoms. All right. So that's important to realize. And I think a lot of people blow some of these off because you think, oh, it's my joints. That has nothing to do with my gut. But guess what? It does.
Yeah.
So don't dismiss something just because it does not seem like an obvious digestive system. It could be related to that. So just another little piece of the puzzle here for you to investigate. So celiac is diagnosed through Ig testing, which is a blood test. They also will do an intestinal biopsy to look at those villi and see if they are showing that flat appearance. You can also get the gene test if you're not sure if you have the gene or not. But if you have a parent with celiac, you definitely have at least one copy of the gene. That's just how genes work. So even if you don't have celiac and you have the gene, I still typically recommend that people follow gluten-free diets because you have potential to develop it at basically any time. Okay. So this is called epigenetics. So you can actually influence that gene being turned on by avoiding the gluten. Okay.
Did we talk about the three-legged stool? I don't think we did.
Not this on this recording.
Not today.
We did not.
So this might be a good part to sort of emphasize that, especially since you're talking about genes, that in that three-legged stool, you have to have all three legs for a disease to manifest. So just having the gene by itself does not necessarily mean you will.
Correct.
So when you talk about sort of that preventative maintenance sort of thing, a stool can't stand on two legs, but three of those, the three legs would be your genetics, the environment that you're in, and the other is your gut, your leaky gut.
Right.
And two of those kind of relate to the gut itself because the environment sort of
right. It's an internal environment and an external environment,
yes.
Right? We have two different environments going on here. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, you gotta check all three legs of the stool. So, I'll hear a lot of people say things like, oh, well, high cholesterol runs in my family, things like that. Well, sorry, but I don't let you use that because that's only about a third of the puzzle. Okay. So just because you have family history of high cholesterol doesn't mean you're destined to have it. A lot of it has to do with your lifestyle and your choices. So know that. And important to know that celiac disease, if you do have a diagnosis, it is a lifelong gluten-free diet. That's the literal only requirement to treat this disease. It won't go away, but I promise you that if you don't follow a gluten-free diet, it will get worse and you're at risk for other autoimmune diseases as well. So you really, really need to be compliant with that. And those villi eventually over time will start growing back as you avoid the gluten. So then you avoid these other problems that come with it. All right, so this is just a little picture to kind of demonstrate what happens to those villi. Again, when someone with celiac or gluten sensitivity consumes gluten, those little villi eventually start getting blunted. So we talked earlier about that rolled up shag carpet. So you go from a nice fluffy shag carpet to a flat, worn down shag carpet.
Berber.
Berber carpet. There you go. So that's just kind of another visual to show you what happens.
You know, I just thought about that Berber carpet that whenever you'd spill something on it, it would like just actually soak right through.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you ever had any.
Yeah, we had
like
some.
So there's no barrier is what I'm trying to get at is like if it's all flat like that, it's just
just a free for all situation.
I think we're going to get to it again, but while it's on my mind and looking at these little villi, they all have like certain things that they're sort of destined to, each one is individually destined to absorb a certain type of nutrient.
Depending where they're located and everything. Yeah.
So, I guess when your villus atrophy comes along, you might be, a little vitamin A nubs versus right
iron nubs or B12 nubs or whatever.
B12 nubs. So it's not like it's just universal. That's kind of how the symptoms arise when you start having these deficiencies. They fall into these categories of other things, and then if it goes too far, and then it becomes an actual diagnosis or disease.
Right. So, and this is why you will not see every single person with celiac have the same deficiencies because the different villi may be impacted.
It's why it's hard. It's so different for everyone.
Yeah. This is similar to the leaky gut visual that we showed you earlier, but this is specific to celiac. So I won't spend too much time on this, but essentially this is showing you the similar situation of how continuous exposure to gluten will start to break down those tight junctions, flatten those villi, and then allow channels for different things to leak out. So these big blue bubbles kind of looking things in here are actually your immune cells, helper T cells and various different types of antibodies. So just like with everything else, those are supposed to remain in the gut because those types of cells are for the digestive tract. So they don't belong anywhere else. So those are also allowed to leak out. And then the rest of the immune system doesn't know what they are because they've never seen them before because they don't belong there. So similar situation, just this is gluten specific. Okay, so a little bit more on infections here. Parasites are one thing that you can be susceptible to. Those are mostly common in people who eat a lot of sushi or other undercooked raw meats, for whatever reason that you would eat raw meat. Raw vegans are also very prone to parasites. So this is because cooking kills parasites. So they're in the soil, they're everywhere, okay? But the food when the food is cooked, it normally kills them. So these are really more common in people who eat a lot of raw food. Then we have Candida, which is a yeast. So any woman who's ever had a yeast infection, this is the organism that causes those. It can very easily overtake the gut bacteria if they're already underpopulated and if the diet is high in sugar. So we're not talking about fruit here. We're talking about added processed sugars, white sugar. So you combine that with a weak immune system, which, by the way, sugar will make worse. So here's another vicious cycle. Candida uses sugar as fuel to spread through the body. Okay, so generally, if you have found out that you have Candida, you're generally put on a sugar-free diet to basically starve the Candida. And then you're given probiotics to help fight the battle, as it were.
And then just to think about it, Candida sort of gets a mind of its own. So when you have cravings for sugar, find that you are never satisfied until you have sugar. It could be the Candida talking. And there's a little test you can do just to see which way you're leaning. If you're interested, we can tell that later. But you know which one I'm talking about.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So yeah, and don't assume that just because you're craving sugar, you have Candida.
No, that's not either.
But it can be caused by lots of things. Blood sugar dysregulation, that kind of thing. But just know that it will, and these are like serious cravings. Like I'm going to go insane if I don't eat sugar kind of thing from what I've heard. So, and then again, opportunistic infections like food poisoning. All right, so we already kind of talked about autoimmune diseases, how these have GI microbiome links. Some others are ADHD, autism, depression, and anxiety. So in all of these conditions, individuals, they've studied populations, which is basically large groups of people that have autism or ADHD or whatever, and they have found a lot of common differences here. So people with autism tend to have a very similar profile of their microbiome. They're missing certain important bacteria. They have overgrowth of other not so beneficial bacteria. Same with some of these other groups. So you see, we're starting to see commonalities between these people and how this can present. We also have neurological disorders like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. There's very strong links in dysfunction of the gut-brain axis, in particular, that communication system between the gut and the brain, right? And also disruptions of the microbiome. And then things like eczema and other skin conditions have also been linked to. And I do want to also say that the research is really growing on this, but we don't really know, we haven't established any cause and effect yet. Okay, so we don't really know what, chicken or egg type situation, what came first. So that's ongoing. Okay, so to correct dysfunction, it's a complex process. I don't generally recommend the average person just kind of attempt to overhaul and fix their gut on their own. It's really best to work with a registered dietitian or a GI doctor who specializes in functional nutrition or functional medicine, or of course a dietitian that specializes in digestive wellness, because they can really help to identify this root cause that we're talking about. Okay, so this kind of goes back to the beginning of our talk, where a lot of times that root cause is something to do with the gut, and then we got to figure out what's going on, where is that dysfunction. So that's the thing that needs to be figured out before anything else can happen. Okay, so once the root cause is identified, then the best course of action can be determined. One thing a lot of people will do is an elimination diet. So this is more or less something you can do at home. I mean, you can get instructions on it online, but I think it's best to work with someone who can kind of guide you through it and support you. And
well, there's so many elimination diets.
Right.
I mean, you can't.
Right. So to even know which one is the right one for you, so.
Right. Because it takes a lot of discipline.
It does. And so the elimination diet can really help you identify these problematic foods, because a lot of times we don't even know that they're problems, like, for example, let's say you're a pretty active person, but your knee always hurts, and you just assume it's because you're active and, oh, I'm just getting older, whatever. Well, for all you know, it's gluten. You know what I mean? So you really need to, it's important to not sort of brush things off and realize. And so this is a way to help you identify that. So the elimination diet also helps the gut to rest and reset and kind of calm down some of that inflammation that might be going on. And then the dietitian can help with that reintroduction process, at which point you'll be tracking how you react to certain foods. So this is a really great way to drill down and pinpoint to see what foods are actually problematic for you, because it is different for everyone.
Right.
And then once the gut can begin healing, then you'll notice that maybe that joint pain gets better. Maybe your skin starts clearing up, lots of other benefits will come after, but you've got to do that first.
Yes. They're sometimes called healing diets too.
Yes. Yeah. You'll see that. You'll see those words a lot of times too, healing diets. It's just a quick review of some substances that can support gut healing. L-glutamine is an amino acid that can help strengthen the walls of the GI tract and repair those junctions, so it can get them back to being tight again like they're supposed to be. There's also bone broth, which is very trendy right now. You see that everywhere. This is very rich in collagen, which is a protein that we need for strong cell walls and tissues. We also need it to make the cartilage that's around our joints, which is why you typically will see collagen. People take it for those, joint issues. It helps regenerate skin cells as well. It's also rich in that L-glutamine and lots of other minerals that are important for healing and energy production. MCT oil, this is medium chain triglyceride oil. This can help kill pathogens in the gut. So if you have some dysbiosis going on, MCT oil is often part of the regimen.
MCT oil is a derivative of coconut oil, right?
Well, coconut oil has MCT oil in it, but it's not considered a high MCT oil. Mm-hmm. So they just make it like synthetically, mm-hmm. essentially. But coconut oil does have some MCT in it, but it's not enough typically as a ratio of the other fats. So usually you just buy straight up MCT oil.
Right. It's concentrated.
Right, exactly. It can also help improve fat absorption. So this is beneficial for increasing your absorption of your fat soluble vitamins, one of which is vitamin D. So if you've had any situation where you're not absorbing fat well, which we'll cover a lot next week in the pancreas, liver, or gallbladder discussion. MCT oil can be really beneficial for that. It also will help repair that gut lining. So again, making those junctions tight, making those cells intact so that nothing is leaking out or in. And then finally, you have magnesium. Magnesium is a very common and very beneficial mineral that helps with that muscle contraction. So we talked about peristalsis earlier. Magnesium is very strongly influential on that. So magnesium is a simple thing you can take, especially if you suffer from constipation. It can help improve that transit time through your gut. All right, and then finally, should you take probiotics? I get asked this all the time. So probiotics, they can restore that microbial balance. They can help correct dysbiosis. I definitely recommend a mixed source for the most part. If you're going to just go to the store and buy a probiotic, you should look for those lactobacillus and bifidobacteria with a good variety of different ones. But generally, for most people, I say start with eating the probiotic foods. So some of them that we talked about earlier, like the yogurt and the kombucha. So try to get 2 to 3 probiotic rich foods in your diet every day. This is good for maintenance, for gut health in general. And then if you have, if you start developing some problems, this is where you could do something more like a GI map test, where they can actually analyze a stool sample and see where your imbalances are and which bacteria you're lacking. And then a professional can actually recommend something and look at your symptoms and kind of see what the best strains would be. Also know that in the case of probiotics, it's not a more is always better type of thing. So for the most part, you actually want to choose a lower CFU